Welcome to Questions We're Afraid to Ask.
Right, welcome back, everybody. We are here with more questions. We're going to talk to John Shea today about more, again, where did we come from and what's going on, and I want to talk to you about survival archaeology. I almost finished your book. I have like 3 chapters left. I skipped and read the last chapter to the end. It's spectacular. I'm fast. I have a million questions.
Thank you.
It's very good. So I want to start with, how did you get into survival archaeology, and tell me a little bit about what that means exactly.
Well, how I got into it was my parents. I was a handful when I was a little kid. My parents sent me to live with my grandfather in the northernmost part of Maine, up in Aroostook County. And my grandmother was a person of the land. She knew the animals, she knew the plants, and she inculcated me an interest and a knowledge about natural history. And as I years and years passed, I went through many different things. I want to be a Coast Guard officer. I'll be a cartoonist, Olympic wrestler, and all this kind of stuff. Eventually, when I settled in archaeology, I realized that what archaeologists were saying about earlier humans wasn't very much informed by survival skills, by just or bushcraft. But they say, I asked, well, how did they make fire? And, well, they made it somehow. It's like, yeah, okay. But there's this, if you don't know how to make fire, you die.
Right.
Or well, how do they find food? Grandmother would say, well, if you eat this, you'll be satisfied and happy. If you eat this, you'll see your ancestors. So I brought this to the table, and for a long time, I was interested in stone tools, and my colleagues said, well, this stone tool indicates this person made it, or this other person made it. I said, look, I mean, come on, guys, I can make any stone tool I can see. So I can make a stone tool that like Homo erectus made. That doesn't make me Homo erectus. So
right.
So I began questioning it, and I thought, rather than trying to figure out who made the tools, which we'll never be able to answer that question, you need a time machine.
Yeah.
To answer how they made the tools, you just need to do some experiments, look at the fracture mechanics, and you can test hypotheses about that straightforwardly. So that's kind of where it came from. Is that I realized we're a whole set of questions to which archaeologists have been expending their efforts for about a century or so. Who made which tools, which we couldn't ever possibly prove wrong. We've been neglecting questions about how do they make fire, how do they make shelter, how do they do first aid and these kinds of things, which are absolutely crucial to human survival. And
right.
It's not that we can't know these things; we just don't ask the questions. I asked my professor, Professor Gable, how do they make fire? Well, we don't know. That's not good enough. If we're asking questions like, how do they domesticate dogs or wheat or cattle, we wouldn't. Well, they did somehow. That's not an acceptable answer.
Absolutely. So, as I was reading through this, there's a couple things that stuck out to me. One, you called out how we're missing a lot of data just because of sea level rise and changes, and not, as far as the. So it's not migration. You think it's dispersal. That's
yes.
Okay. And just completely, like, there's no migration at all, really? You think it's all dispersal?
Before agriculture, yes, it's all dispersal.
Okay.
If you drop me on an island, somewhere,
yeah,
the first thing I would do is I would head to the coast and look for where fresh water meets salt water, an estuary, because that's where all the food is. And
right.
The difficulty is, when prehistoric humans moved around, they knew that too. These guys weren't stupid.
Right.
They look at landscapes. Well, let's go up to the mountains. That's where the glaciers are. And they say, no, you're gonna die. or let's go play with the cave bears. No, that's kind of stupid. So they would look at a landscape objectively, like you would or I would, and say, okay, where can we get the most food without having to move around and burn up calories? And these are the lower ends of river valleys and estuaries where fresh water meets salt water. This is where all the food is. There's more humanly accessible calories in those kinds of environments than anywhere else on the landscape. The trouble is, those ice age coastlines, estuaries, and lower river valleys, they're under 150 meters of water right now.
Right.
So, we can get to them. It's just not going to be easy. 150 meters is, you can't do that in scuba gear. That's robot stuff. Now,
okay.
You can do lower, higher elevations. And colleagues, especially the guys from Gibraltar, people from the Museum of Gibraltar and the University of Gibraltar, these guys are all scuba trained. They go down there off the coast of Gibraltar, and there's stone tools, and there's archaeological evidence around fossil springs. Prehistoric people weren't stupid. They knew where the food was. It's just it's difficult for us to get at those landscapes, but we can do it. If we can put not just one man, but a dozen or so astronauts on the moon, we can put an archaeologist on the seafloor 150 meters down, or give him a robot and do that. We can get to the Titanic. We can get to 150 meters.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating the way you're talking about some of this stuff, because the things you're describing are the same things that we talk about in like our basic survival class and our basic bushcraft stuff, because that's a hobby of mine. And if you watch any of like the serious people like the Cody Lundins, who didn't do it for
this guy,
he didn't really do it. He wanted to teach. He didn't want to do the kind of Hollywood stuff. Or my favorite one is Les Stroud, because he went out there and filmed it all and did a lot of that himself. And they talk about all this practical stuff. A lot of these basic philosophies haven't changed. They're exactly the same now as they would have been, 50, 60,000 years ago. And one of my favorite examples is like the basic stuff you should put in a quote unquote survival kit. Yeah. Isn't that different in a book right now as what we got off, I think it's pronounced Otzi the Iceman, that came out of, if you look at, now granted it's different materials, but he's carrying the same kind of stuff, right? Yep. Something to make fire, tinder. He had like 4 different cutting tools on him. He even had a little, hand drill, a bone awl. And it's fascinating. It's a 10-piece emergency kit, at least.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, prehistoric people like modern people, if you're going to be in a dangerous environment, you have to think. It's basic. It's basic 6 survival problems: first aid, shelter, water, food, communications, and transportation. The inspiration for survival archaeology was Cody London. I was doing his desert drifter survival class, and I was the professor. I was the oldest. I think I was probably the oldest guy in the class, and I was an anthropologist, and we were sitting around at campfires and this kind of thing. And what do you do? I'm CEO for software. I'm a former Force Recon Marine. I'm a kid who runs a gold mine, this kind of thing. And so, what do you do? I'm a professor of anthropology. The kids, people in the class would ask me, how did prehistoric people make fire? How did prehistoric people ever figure out how to make leather? How did prehistoric people ever figure out how to make cordage? This kind of thing. And I kept saying, we don't know. And finally, Cody popped up and said, how is it that you people don't know this stuff? It was one of his epiphanies. I thought, we're asking the wrong questions. We don't have the answers because we don't ask the questions. Now, for all this time, people say, "Oh, Jesus, Neanderthals, oh, they couldn't make fire. Oh, how did they survive?" It's like, bitch, please. They lived in Northern Europe during the Ice Age. They had a way to make fire, and so well, did they do this or did that? And finally, about 2 years ago, colleagues looked at these stone tools, about these things called hand axes. They're about like size and shape of your hand, and they found scratches on them very similar to the kind of scratches that people make using flint and steel, or flint hand axes, or in this case not steel but marcasite, an iron-rich mineral. And oh my goodness, Neanderthals, use percussion to create sparks. Yeah, because they weren't stupid, So we underestimate our ancestors' skills because we don't ask the questions. And I just thought, Okay. Asking the questions nobody asks, that's kind of my niche within this field. They say, I got my hand up in meetings. It's like, oh, Jesus, God, ask the question. But it's fun. It pulls people into the human origins research who aren't usually engaged in this.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these guys, they study stone tools. They can't make them. They don't use them. This kind of stuff. And you talk to the survival guys, it's like, really? Stone tools? I use one for like a year. And my archaeology colleagues, they think these guys are making stone tools every 15 seconds. So I think it's a new perspective, and I hope it inspires new questions.
It is so I got lost a little bit in the talking about the cores, the prismatic cores and the half cores, and so I'm assuming that was just sort of the watching the evolution of the complexity as they over time. Is that what you were seeing? They're getting more complicated.
Here's the deal with the blade, the prismatic blade cores. When humans arrived in Europe 45,000 years ago, they brought with them these cores. These long, narrow things off of which they strike, long and narrow flakes or blades. And so the first archaeologists decided, well, blades indicate modern humans, and blades are evidence of intelligence. And blades show that these people were modern humans as opposed to archaic humans. Bullshit. Right. Africans are making blades 250,000 years ago. I know because we dug up their remains, and blades are sitting in the ground in the same level as these early human fossils. So it's archaeology got going in Europe, and so the sequence of changes in Europe early on became like the standard. People say, well, Europe is the pattern. Excuse me, the pattern of evidence in Europe is a global pattern. That's not true.
Right.
The things that showed up 45,000 years ago in Europe show up because Neanderthals became extinct because they froze to death, and then humans showed up, and oh wow, humans invented these things. Now they're doing this stuff in Africa 250,000 years ago. And to that point, people in Australia, Aboriginal Australians, they didn't make blades at all. It's like, blades, bitch, please. We got other stuff to do, like hunting, rhinoceros-sized kangaroos.
Yeah.
So some of this is I'm as an archaeologist, I'm a weird archaeologist. Most people who study Stone Age archaeology, they're either Europeans or they're trained in European universities or by European archaeologists. I was trained by an African archaeologist, Clint Isaac, and by an Israeli archaeologist, Ofer Bar Yosef. And they said to me, this isn't Europe. Ofer would say, this isn't Europe. This is Israel. Or Glenn would say, John, forget about Europe. This is Africa. And so, you want to understand how people adapted. You need to understand Africa or Israel or what have you, and understand how they adapted to the landscape. It's not what they did wasn't they weren't trying to imitate Europeans because they didn't know they existed. They're trying to solve basic problems. How do I feed myself and my family? How to make sure my kids have enough food and an acceptable choice of mates.
Yeah, absolutely. You said something I really liked in the book. I don't remember where. I think it was around chapter 3. That arrows on a map cheapen the hardship, and
yes.
I really liked that we're so used to just like they went here, and then there's this big pretty arrow that points up into Europe, and you're like, excellent, that's when it happened, and the way you're like. If you really stop and think about it, you're like, well, no, it wasn't. It was a whole bunch of people just really slowly kind of working their way, just like we see with, urban sprawl. Cities just slowly get bigger and bigger. I'm sure people spread, until your village gets to the size until you hate that guy and you're like, we're going over there and we're going to start another place. And then it just keeps going.
Arrows on a map. Yeah, that's a problem. I mean, it's part of our, we often drag into the we often drag into the prehistoric past things of our common experience. So if you are living in, let's say you're living in Dallas. I don't know where you guys are, but let's say you live in Dallas and you want to go to Beijing. You jump in a plane, zip, however many hours later, you're across the Himalayas, bang, you're in Beijing. Hakuna Matata, no problem. But, they didn't have 747s back in the Ice Age. If you needed to get from point A to point B, you had to climb mountains, you had to cross rivers. You have to deal with other people. Arrows on maps make the accomplishments of our ancestors cheap. They make them look easy. When crossing rivers, if you want to cross the Rhine River today, no shit. You just jump in a boat or take a taxi boat or across. Or, a couple of thousand years ago, you jump in a paddle across a boat. It's no big worries. It's the Rhine River. You want to cross the Rhine River during the Ice Age, if you were in water for more than 30 seconds, you're dead because hypothermia kills in minutes. So, arrows, it's a convention. It's a metaphor. It makes things look simple and easy that were actually very, very difficult. And, in terms of crossing just the Rhine River, crossing the Rhine River cost thousands and thousands and thousands of lives of our ancestors.
Yeah.
We forget that. And arrows cheapen that.
I think people underestimate how hard it is to just move through terrain, carrying your stuff. And, we had when I first kind of got into all the camping stuff and Daniel went with me, we went on a camping trip, with modern gear and everything. And it was a 4-mile hike in, and we were stupid. We wore the wrong kind of clothes. It was too hot. And we got to the place that we were going to get, and Daniel was dehydrated. And it wasn't until I got almost 3 gallons of water into him that he started kind of it wasn't, well, it was dangerous, but it didn't, because I realized what was going on. But just that small snippet, it feels like if people who studied ancient history and archaeology and this had to go do a little bit of practical, just backpacking or something like that, maybe they could get a better understanding of how hard this kind of stuff is.
Well, we do. I haven't gone to the field for the last few years. I'm getting old, and I want to spend time with my wife. But when I was a younger man, we go often to the deserts in Israel, Jordan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Kenya, Tanzania, and these places, and you go out there loaded for bear. You take everything you possibly can, and that puts a lot of technology between you and problems. But ancient people had different kinds of technology and different kinds of problems. I think the comfort with which we go go away from other people, we tend to project that back in the past, whereas ancient people, they were always thinking not everything's great, this kind of thing. They're thinking, what could go wrong? If grandfather gets bitten by a snake, if grandmother gets eaten by a crocodile, you just lost grandfather, grandmother, 40, 50 years a piece of accumulated knowledge. Grandmother might have, you lose grandmother, she may be the last person who knows how to deal with a breech birth. Grandfather, he knows how you deal with a once in a century drought. So, nowadays we have, books and guides and this kind of stuff to help us with these kinds of things. Our ancestors had different ways of preserving that information. And basically it was, you keep everybody alive. You can't afford to put grandmother or grandfather out on an ice floe for the polar bears. That's bullshit. It's a myth. I think studying how people survive today, who lives, who dies, and why, can give us inspiration. They're asking different kinds of questions about the past. I mean, our ancestors were badasses. Really, think about it. They went from being an endangered African primate, one of the many hominid species running around Africa 250,000 years ago, to a global diaspora in which we're the equivalent of a geological force. We do something a little bit different, and the geology of the planet changes. There's no other species that does that. I mean, chimps throw poop at each other, big deal. Poop has been thrown. It doesn't change the environment of Africa. Humans decide, let's make iron. That really changes the geography of Africa. Because you want to make iron, you need charcoal. You need charcoal, you need trees. Trees are gone. You get you turn forests into grasslands.
So you talked about the 5 precision grasping, bipedalism, predictive hallucinations, language with quantal speech, and hyper-sociality.
Okay.
Now, those are the ones that you said that. Oh, I'm gonna forget what it is. It's not the one before Homo sapien is
Homo heidelbergensis.
Thank you. And so you were saying that they have those same features as well.
Yes.
Homo sapien just utilizes them better, essentially.
Well, okay, let's take them one by one.
Okay.
Predictive hallucination means taking information, partial information, and being able to make an accurate prediction about what will happen.
Right.
So making stone tools. You hit a rock with another rock. The fracture propagates one way or another. That's predictive hallucination. I mean, a more prosaic one would be, you and I, we walk outside, we look at the sky, we see cirrus clouds, and cirrus clouds mean there's rain coming. Or we look at the stock market and say, oh, sell, buy, whatever. Okay, that's predictive hallucination. Powerful precision grasping. We can do this because we have these oddly shaped hands. Apes have long fingers but small thumbs. So if when you tie your shoes in the morning, you're engaging in powerful precision grasping. Okay. Apes have powerful precision grasping too. They just don't use it to do things like tie knots or make shoes or sew things. They use it to make sticks and pick termites out of mouths. What's the other one? Endurance bipedalism. Now, have either you gentlemen run along a foot race?
Yes,
years ago.
Past.
Okay. Well, I have a friend, a colleague at Harvard. He's Daniel Lieberman. Dan runs marathons barefoot. And he ran a marathon race against horses. It was a man versus horse race in Prescott, Arizona, and he won. I mean, humans are really good. If a human and a chimpanzee were tethered together running a marathon, the chimpanzee would be in deep doo-doo after a couple of kilometers. The human would run a marathon. You see these guys stumble across the end of the Boston Marathon. No problem. I mean, they just keep, walking. So we're really good at walking a long time. And part of that is also swimming. We swim really well. Apes, throw an ape in the water, apes drown. They can dog paddle a little bit, but we can swim for miles. What's that lady? I forgot her name. She swam from Florida to Cuba.
Yeah.
There are rivers in Africa that are only a couple hundred meters across that have divided chimpanzee populations for hundreds of thousands of years. Those same rivers are teeming with little African kids swimming with boats and with their parents, keeping close lookout against crocodiles. So, but endurance bipedalism allows us to move in ways that other primates don't. Okay, so quantal speech. That's the other one. I could talk to you without using syntax or grammar, but it wouldn't make much sense.
Right.
We can communicate. If I were to say, something like, like a Neanderthal. If you want to talk like a Neanderthal, you put your tongue up against your front teeth and you talk like this. Neanderthal speech would be nasalized, like little kids. What I just told you is look up behind you. There's a lion. So with quantal speech involves high fidelity communication and rapid speech with easy, with ease of copying. So if I say, can you repeat that? You have trouble. If I say, look up behind you, there's a lion, no problem. You can imitate that just instantly. Where are we at?
And then hyper-sociality.
Hyper-sociality. Okay, you're driving down the highway. You see a car. There's a young man or young lady with a flat tire. What do? What's your first instinct?
Stop and help.
Stop and help out. Yeah.
This would be this would be explain. Do you try to explain this to a chimpanzee? Like explain calculus to a dog.
Right.
Humans help each other, even strangers, and we help each other in proportion to the degree to which we send signals of similarity. So we used to joke, when I was working in the Middle East in the 1980s, anybody with a Canadian, flag on their backpack, that's an American. it's a signal. You wouldn't wear an American flag at that point. It was like having a bullseye. So we use our artifacts to send messages to one another and to encourage cooperation. It scales infinite. We can scale our cooperation between we three who are talking right now, all the way up to the entire planet. We three were talking about paleoanthropology. Let's say we have a dinosaur killer scale asteroid heading for us. The entire planet is focused on that problem, and we'll knock that sucker off the path and survive.
Yeah.
So that's hyper-sociality.
So how far back do we think those things go? Like how many more Homo species do we go back? Do we still see precision grasping and I mean,
they have them all.
Okay.
All of them. Hyper-sociality, it may be something that's uniquely derived among Homo sapiens. The jury's still out, but all the other things, precision grasping, predictive hallucination, endurance bipedalism, these sorts of things, we have evidence for them among earlier hominids, but we don't see what those earlier guys, it's integrating them, putting them together, combining them.
Oh, okay.
And what we do really well is we pull them all together at the same time. And so it's kind of like having a bunch of standalone computers versus a local area network.
I gotcha.
Or 4 or 5 guys out in the woods by themselves versus a special forces A team where everybody has overlapping skills.
Right. Okay. All right. I've got more. So I really like the how versus who. Is that sent me down a whole path of like, okay, well then how did we make those ancient objects that are so precise that we don't have explanations for at this point? But I like the idea behind that because who cares who made the thing? Like it doesn't but like how did they do that? How do you get there? Really seems to answer. It doesn't matter if it was these guys over here who did it or that's not what's important. What's important is how we do it and how we go about making it happen.
I approach this as a scientist, and for me as a scientist, arguments about the past have to be capable of being proven wrong. So one has, if you're going to make an argument about the past, you have to tell people how can you prove this wrong. So if my colleagues say, well, Neanderthals made these tools, I'll say, all right, fine. Well, we found a Neanderthal fossil together with the tools. All that means is that the Neanderthal fossil, this creature died around the same time somebody threw the tools in the same level of the cave. It doesn't mean they made the tools.
Right.
If you find a Neanderthal fossil holding a stone tool in his hand, doesn't mean Neanderthal made the stone tool. He might have been, or she might have been walking around and said, "Hey, look at this weird ass stone tool. I'll take it with me." And then, I got hit by a bolt of lightning or a lion ate me, something like this, or so you can't falsify, you can't prove wrong these who questions.
Right.
But if you say to me, how do they make fire? And I say, well, they made fire by, striking marcasite against a hand axe. Well, okay, let's look at the hand axes, see if they're able to detect marcasite, which marcasite is a rock with lots of iron. It basically looks like a turd. So could they discriminate between a hard turd and marcasite and use the strike fire? Well, okay, there's the evidence. Or did they know how to make fire by using a bow drill or with a hand of fire drill? Do we find evidence of them using rotary movements for anything? Well, we don't. So we find that with humans, but not with Neanderthals. So maybe that's an important difference. The point is how you can prove how questions wrong. You can't prove who questions wrong unless you have a time machine. In which case,
let's work on that.
Out of business.
So you another thing talking about assuming the consequent. So looking at these different, you talk sort of the idea of looking at these trivial differences between two different things and putting more importance on them than we need to. How are there things that we're overestimating when we're looking back at this stuff, that we're that's more important than it. We're thinking it's more important than it needs to be.
Yeah, one of them is we give names to these fossils. So we give names to some fossils. We assign them to be Neanderthals, and we assign others to being humans, us Homo sapiens. Now, these are differences we infer from the shapes of their skulls and the distribution of the fossils. But on the ground, they may have just looked at each other as like, those dark-skinned guys with funny-looking heads, or these pale guys with big faces, and it might not. We tend to assume that the differences we see in the fossil and archaeological record are like the important biological differences or important cultural differences. So these guys made these kinds of stone tools over here. These other guys made these different kinds of stone tools. Oh, they're different people. They have no cultural interactions. That's absolutely effing nonsense. Nothing in 200 years of anthropology suggests or shows that how people made pots or stone tools or any other kind of artifact was a barrier to them meeting each other, becoming friends, becoming enemies, picking mates from one another. So we tend to assume that the differences in the fossils and archaeology are profound differences to interaction when they've made it trivial. I like to think, all my colleagues say, well, here's a reconstruction of Neanderthals, and here's a reconstruction of humans. Oh, they're very different. But 45,000 years ago, there's probably a bunch of these guys sitting around in a cave. Some of them look more like Neanderthals. Some of them look more like humans, and they got along with each other. They tell jokes. They compared stone tools. Hey, you guys make this way. We make this way. Wow, isn't that cool? We tend to impose barriers and inflection points on the fossil and archaeological evidence unnecessarily. If there's really a big difference, it should be obvious, and those differences aren't there. I honest to God, somebody said time machine, John, 45,000 years ago, you're in Western Europe or Israel or something like this. What are you seeing? I'm seeing a bunch of Neanderthals and humans sitting around the campfire saying, hey, you guys have been living here. Your Neanderthals have been living here for 250,000 years or since, your ancestors. What can you teach us? And the Neanderthals saying to the humans, hey, you've got these different kinds of tools and different ways of doing things. How can we learn them? This idea, this exclusionary thing, this thing, no, well, you open your egg on the narrow side versus the wide side. We can't talk to each other. That's from Jonathan Swift from Gulliver's Travels. This is an artifact of high population densities. When people live on landscapes where there are very few people, everybody's a potential ally. You can't afford to exclude people. I mean, imagine you walk into this river, the Rhine River or the Rhone River, or you're an early human. And, these guys have been living there for 250,000 years. Oh yeah, let's throw spears and arrows at them. That's an excellent idea. What could possibly go wrong? Or you say, hey, let's cooperate. We've got these things we can teach you. You've got stuff we can teach us. That's my perspective.
Yeah.
It's changed. When I was younger and stupider, I thought humans just exterminated Neanderthals the minute they set eyes on them. But age doesn't necessarily correlate with wisdom. But in this case, maybe I got wiser.
And one of the things Daniel and I talk about is, especially when it's hard to prove it, it's like two things can be true at the same time, right? Yes. So maybe a group of them got together and fought because they were just hyper aggressive. And then some of them may have gotten together and helped each other out. And I remember, because I got to read part of the book, but I haven't been able to get through as much of it as Daniel has. And you talk a little bit about the genetic stuff and how much we've learned and all of that. And it fascinates me because when I did the DNA test, I found that I'm in like the 95th percentile for having Neanderthal DNA in my background. So which is cool, but at some point there was commingling at some point, right? I can't tell you what it looked like, but how for that what you just explained makes more sense to me than, like, say the Them and Us book, where they take people and run off with them and all of that. So, but I think you get people who cooperate when things are hard, right? Even if there's quote unquote conflict going on. There's been so many stories about, people in a war who get stuck on their own on an island somewhere, and they work together, and it happens. That yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example. One of them required you to go read a book. I forgot. Honestly, I've forgotten the title of this book. Something about the island of something or other, where two different whaling expeditions, crashed on opposite sides of the island. And one group, it was everybody pulled together and worked together, and I think half or more of them survived to be rescued. The other side of the island, like 4 or 5 years later, the boat crashed. Devil, take the hindmost, every man for himself, and only 1 or 2 of them survived. So, working together, this is hyper-sociality. Working together is a huge, force multiplier in human evolution. Now, I'll give you a practical example of this. When we were in Ethiopia, back about 2001, 2002, we were doing archaeological work in the territory of 2 different people, the Morsi people and the Nyagatam, different ethnic groups, and the languages are about as different as, say, Chinese and Arabic. So, they and so the Nyagatam were like, those Morsi, oh, they're different people, they're bad people. And we go to the Morsi, and Morsi would say, oh, the Nyagatam, evil, oh, I can't trust them, this kind of stuff. And we would regularly have to take our boat from where we're living in Nyagatam territory to Morsi territory. So we fly the boat over and this kind of stuff, and hear the stories about how awful one or another group were. So at some point, a bunch of young Nyagatam idiots, men, decided to do an unauthorized cattle raid to the Morsi. So while we were off there visiting the Morsi people and trying to do some first aid stuff, I'm not a doctor, but I know a little bit. I deal with malaria and trying to ease people's suffering, this kind of stuff. And we're off doing this kind of stuff with the Morsi. These a-holes from the Nyagatam slipped across the river and tried to do a cattle raid. So we're over in the Morsi territory. We hear, and people getting kind of hinky. Something's going on. We jump in our boats, go back to the Nyagatam territory, and there's gunfire. Bullets zipping through the trees, this kind of stuff. And then the 3 shots, bang, bang, bang. It means everybody drop your guns, go to the chief's residence, figure out what the F is going on. So we get there. The Nyagatam's, it became clear. The Morsi elders said, you guys try to steal our cattle. The Nyagatam elders said, these were young men. They're stupid. We're going to beat them with sticks in a place where you can see them. So they brought these guys out by the river, hit them with sticks, and said, you ever do this again, we'll effing, end you. This kind of stuff. So we had to have, we're the foreigners. We said, all right, let's have a peace conference. Everybody gets together. The Morsi elders, the Nyagatam elders, and the warriors, they all came together in our camp. So we had 40 people and 600 machine guns. So we get there, and it was like, we introduced the elders of the Morsi, the elders of the Nyagatam. It's like, we don't need, John, you don't need to introduce them. We know each other. They spoke the same language. They were married to each other's sisters and brothers. They're, oh, how's Martha doing? Oh, she's great. She's got 6 kids. How about Bertha? Oh, she's got 5 kids, and this kind of stuff. I was like, what the F is this? And this kind of stuff. We reached an agreement. Said, look, as long as these Farange is Amharic for white people. As long as the French are here, let's just everybody cool down. They're just picking up rocks and stuff out of the ground. They're crazy. We get it, but let's leave them alone. This kind of stuff, and it was like we're singing. You guys are, according to Ethiopians, you're mortal enemies. According to the tourist books, you're shooting each other all the time. We get them, face to face, sitting at our campsite, eating the same goat. And it's like, this is bullshit. This idea that these guys are mortal enemies. People work things out. I gotta tell you though, we had the end of the meeting. The chiefs were shaking hands, this kind of stuff. Everybody was, high fiving one another and this kind of stuff. And I got my Morsi name, John Chai, and one of the Nyagatam chiefs was sitting there. He looks over his shoulder and he said an expression in Nyagatam that I can't translate it in English because, you don't want to broadcast this. He jumps up, picks up, he gets his robe, jumps over the thorn fence around the camp, runs into the bushes, grabs this 6.5 foot tall warrior, yanks the Kalashnikov out of his hand, bitch slaps him upside the head, and said, and yells at him and this kind of stuff. He comes back into the camp, sits down, lights a cigarette. We said, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot was that? Well, he borrowed his father's machine gun without authorization. It's like stealing the keys to the station wagon. And it's like, the Nyagatam elder said, "What's the station wagon?" It's like, all right,
Yeah. How do I explain that?
People aren't that different. The point is, we tend to think as anthropologists, we tend to think about differences among humans as categorical differences.
Mm-hmm.
German and French, Nyagatam and Morsi, white guys and Africans. Whereas on the ground, when you have to solve survival problems, how do you get along? People find a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're a lot more clever than we give ourselves credit for.
Yes, that's very true. So have you seen the footprints that they just found in White Sands, the 23,000? So that all falls into what you talk about in that chapter. How do we account for the genetic between the ancient Brazilians and the ancient Australians? They've seen have you seen this?
I know about the New Mexico footprints very well.
Okay.
I'm in New Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah, those are pretty fascinating.
Okay,
I'm excited about those.
Yeah. The thing is, we tend to think about these these earlier hominin population movements as migrations, as a whole bunch of people moving at the same time in the same direction. That's wrong. To get migrations, you need enormous quantities of storable food.
Mm-hmm.
Such enormous quantities of storable food are products of agriculture. Now, there may be some people who manage to do root crops and store them and move from Southeast Asia to near Pacific Islands. But for the most part, the economic basis for migrations are things that have only been available to humans for the last 10,000 years. So what happened with the Americas, it wasn't just one movement. This is what geneticists, always, well, this movement happened 25,000 years ago, this one 12,000 years ago. People are moving back and forth. It's like the subway in New York.
Okay.
People are moving back and forth from Asia to the Americas, from the Americas to Asia. And the thing is, humans were probably here in the Americas 25,000 years ago, but there probably weren't very many of them. Okay. It's like any place, like there weren't very many Europeans moving into North America in the 17th and 18th centuries, or there weren't very many Polynesians moving into the Pacific 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. They're very thin on the ground, and so you expect it's very difficult to detect them. So what happens is about 10,000 years ago, about 12,000 years ago, people in the Americas, ancestral Native Americans, started making very distinctive stone tools. They call it, Clovis points or Clovis artifacts. These things stand out. Nature does not replicate these things. So what happens is that there's a very faint signal before about 12,000 years ago and a very distinctive one afterwards. Now, what's probably going on, and this is something we can see in human evolution, species of our genus, Homo, disperse really fast. Okay. The dates for Homo erectus in Africa are indistinguishable from the dates for Homo erectus in Southeast Asia. So wherever they originated, they spread really fast.
Okay.
Dates for Homo heidelbergensis are essentially the same throughout that creature's geographic range: Europe, Africa, and Asia. Okay. Dates for Homo neanderthalensis We can't pinpoint a specific place where Neanderthals emerged. And the same with Homo sapiens, with our species. Basically, it's a tie between Israel, Morocco, and South Africa and Eastern Africa. So what that means is it's not maybe they emerged all these places simultaneously, or they just emerged in one place and spread really, really fast. That's an ancestral characteristic. Humans and our ancestors move really fast. Now, the problem with that is that if you move really fast and spread yourself thin on the ground, your children don't have a very wide choice of mates. Sonny Jim has, maybe, one or two people in his tribe, and they're both his, cousins or sisters or something like that. That's not a good prescription,
Right.
or young Mary or Judith or whatever, has, a choice among, 4 people. So what happens when humans spread out is they have to establish these networks in which they can, find potentially wider choices of mates. One way to do that is to link people up with distinctive rituals and customs and making distinctive artifacts and this kind of thing. So humans came into the New World 25,000 years ago. They moved really fast, all the way into South America and that sort of thing. At some point, they reached a crisis and realized, oh shit, we haven't got, our sons and our daughters need a wider choice of mates than local local idiots. Then they started establishing these networks, the Clovis network, or similar sorts of things in the old world. So,
yeah, it's fascinating. You mentioned the Clovis stuff, and we were lucky enough to talk to the gentleman who's now running the Galt site. Are you familiar with the Galt site here in Florence, Texas? That's like halfway between where Daniel and I live. And I've always been fascinated kind of by our own arrogance when it comes to academia in general, how like we know everything, we figured it out. Oh, new thing. Now we know everything and we figured it out. Oh, but now that doesn't line up with my book, so let's not read that book. And I, because my background's in theology, and there's a whole bunch of like, oh no, we're not going to look at those manuscripts or this or that. There's a whole bunch of like this infighting whenever new data comes up. But the Galt site was like wide opening because we were talking about it, and I know they've got a lot of stuff they're still sifting through artifact wise that they haven't been able to catalog and do that. Yes. But what blew me away, because I've read a lot about it, is when we had him on here, he was talking about the art that they had found way below the Clovis stuff, and we're like, art? What art? And it's just so, and then growing up, Daniel's in my generation was like Clovis was the oldest people who ever got here, right? And that just like Neanderthal was a caveman, and so it's just this whole field. It seems like we're constantly finding new data, and then I always stop and think to myself, we're only finding what got left and what we can find, right? What else might be out there too? And I know that's a question we can't really answer.
Well, let's talk about Clovis for a little bit. I mean, Clovis is marked by these stone points. They're about, but 5 or 6 inches long. They have a very distinctive little flake detached from their base. It's really easy to make a mistake making these things. They're very difficult to make. And when you talk to modern craft and hobby stone tool makers, they say, "Look, I made a Clovis point." It's like it's like having a Medal of Honor. Making those things could be kind of a performance, a way of saying, look, I've this isn't something from an anthropologist. It's really an idea that came from a filmmaker who made this movie called The Alpha, about a boy who domesticates the first wolf. It starts out and they're making these points, and the elders say, "No, you've done it wrong." This kind of thing. It's not about the point. It's about following directions. So if you try to make a Clovis point and you don't follow directions, you'll fail. It's extremely easy to fail. It's really difficult to succeed. Now, if you succeed, you've demonstrated to other people that you can follow directions and you're someone we can trust. Like we're gonna go knock down a mammoth, and we got 20 people, and can we trust you? Oh,
right.
If we trust you, here's your proof of concept. Make a Clovis, make a point. So here's the deal. if early humans were scattered all over the New World, all over the Americas, and then this custom arose and said, "Well, here's a way of making your bones," as mafia would say. Here's a way of establishing your bona fides as someone who can follow complex directions. Then we're willing to accept you. We'll take you in our group. That lowers the threshold. It says, we're going to go knock down a mammoth, and we trust you. Don't betray us. Instantly, when people start making those points, the big mammals, the mammoths, mastodons, the ground sloths, the horses, these things, they just vanish like that. It's, because you now have a symbolic and social and pro-social way of encouraging people to work together to go after animals. You and me, we three with spears against a mammoth, we're toast. They kick us in the low Earth orbit. 30 or 40 of us, well, have all shown that we can cooperate, shown we can follow directions. You flank this creature. You distract it. You go in for the kill shot. This kind of thing. That enables activities that would be with high risks and high returns that would previously be difficult. It's not just speculation. There's something like this that happened in the 19th century. It's called the ghost dance. I think Arapaho, Shoshone, I've forgotten, a prophet named Moloka, who had initiated this dance. And the dance was to bring together, Lakota, Dakota, Shoshone, Arapaho, and the Plains tribes. It was a complex dance. You had to study this. And they're really secretive about this. Maybe one little video, I think Edison filmed, of the ghost dance. But this was, it pulled together people who were formerly separated. The federal government in the United States separated Arapaho over here, Shoshone over here, Lakota over here, Dakota over here, kind of separate them. But and it scared the shit out of them. The federal government they suppressed this because they're afraid these guys will get their act together and knock the federals off the plains. This was so Clovis and this kind of thing. It's not the first people. It's a way of pulling together people who were formerly so distributed they couldn't find mates. And look, I tell my students, if you want to explain prehistory, you got to explain what matters. If it doesn't influence reproductive success, it's irrelevant. Evolution is about reproductive success. Fine art and this kind of stuff, yes. How does it influence reproductive success? If not at all, then it's irrelevant.
As far as we talk about dispersion and all that, how did we get it so wrong? Like where did the assumption of migration come from, and how did we start at that assumption? And even though that's not right, like what was the error? Do we know?
History.
Okay.
Simple history. I mean, if you look at a history of Europe, history of Near East, history of Africa, the last several thousand years, it's been this named group of people from this region, picked up all their goats, cattle, sheep, and whatever, and moved to this other region. So migrations are familiar things. And so, when we look back in the past, we say, all right, well, maybe past processes were just like the present. We don't often give enough scrutiny to what underwrites those movements. I tell my students this: look, I'm from Massachusetts. My people have been there for centuries. When the Pilgrims came, and I'm not defending the Pilgrims, but when the Pilgrims came to Massachusetts Bay, they had members of a small Protestant religious sect. One group.
That's my people. Sorry
Mine
about
too.
that.
Yeah.
No, don't be sorry. The Mayflower Compact was, the basis for much of the later human American law. Okay, look, they were the members of the Pilgrim sect. There were strangers, these other guys who weren't members of the sect, who came off to seek their fortunes. There were sailors who were there for the season, who brought these people over and said, all right, good luck, have fun with the up and log, people. We're off. So you had three groups of people. One, they're migrating, the members of the Pilgrim sect. Others, they're dispersing. They're seeking their fortunes. That third group, they're there for the season and said, all right, I'm fine. We're going back to England, and the next boat is to, Gibraltar or Africa or what have you.
Right.
Here's the deal. All those things can occur simultaneously today.
Right.
The only one that occurs today that could not have occurred during the Ice Age is migration. Ice Age people didn't have the means by which to create the enormous stores of food, stored energy, that they would need to subsist on as they moved and in their destinations. Do you know the first military action by Europeans against Europeans in North America was by the Plymouth Pilgrims against those strangers who had gone off and said, F you clowns, we're going to go live with Wampanoags in Massachusetts. And it went off and formed a little colony called Marymount, which I think Weymouth in Massachusetts. They formed this little community. The Pilgrims lost their minds and went out and captured these guys and shipped them back to England. So prehistoric human population movements were probably a mixture of all those things, of individuals dispersing when the economic means by which to migrate were possible. They migrated, as well as people moving along to assist us, sort of thing. Guides, people, who led European Americans across the plains and into the Rockies,
right?
Like Kit Carson, for example.
Yeah. Okay. So we can talk about, is the Clovis point the most complicated one? Like, is it like the pinnacle of stone points? Is that why it's so significant?
It's extremely difficult. They are extremely difficult to make, and it's really easy to mess up.
Okay.
There are also. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's sort of like throwing daggers at a person in a magic show. You mess up, and people remember.
Okay, got it.
Well, they're also very efficient when you get down to like the arrowhead, as far as a hunting tool, and at least as I've seen, like a broadhead versus some of the more primitive ones. But you're right; they're not easy to make. I've seen people try to make them, and I've seen masters who can knock out that kind of shape super fast, and it's amazing to watch somebody do that.
It's fun. There are a couple of tricks. I can't tell you because they have to kill you. But there's a few tricks that make it a lot easier than others, and this is, like I said, it's almost like a magic show. A card trick, or not a rabbit out of a hat, because that's horrible. But misdirection. Now, I have a young colleague named Metin Eren from Kent State University, who is a very good stoneworker. He's vastly more talented than I am, and he's really good at this stuff. And he actually has said, it's like magic. It's like magic tricks. It's part of the performance. So I think there's something there. This is something you do to establish your bona fides as a member of a group, and it's not unique. There are in other parts of the world, in Europe, 20,000 years ago. There's archaeologists call it the Solutrean culture, where they made very long, narrow, and thin stone tools by percussion. And you look at these things and you think, wow, they're not. There are even crazier ways of making stone tools, but it's really easy to mess these things up.
Yeah.
I think what's probably going is something similar. 18 to 20,000 years ago in Europe was a time it was just insane cold. There were very few people. And so again, the main problem isn't like, geez, how do we make stone tools? You bang two rocks together. The main problem is my son, our daughter, they need a husband or a wife, as the case may be. How do we make sure that we have a good son-in-law or a good daughter-in-law? We test them by saying, can you follow directions? So here's this tool. This is how we make it. Try to make it. And it's just not like medieval things with the three princes and the contest, but they might say, yeah, okay, Bob, he's okay, he does a good job, but Joe's really good. Joe can make it just like grandfather does, and Tim, I'm sorry, Tim, not our kind, dear. So
you mentioned at one point that we find evidence of like practice pieces. I don't remember.
Oh yes.
So do we see similar stuff like busted Clovis points where someone was on their way and they screwed it up? Like, do we find
Yes.
lots of evidence? Okay, cool.
All the time. We find this from all periods of prehistory. It's more obvious in recent time periods because in more recent time periods, people spend more time making stone tools. But even the oldest stone tools, you see people made mistakes. They hit the rock fractured the wrong way. They kept hitting. It's like, this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
As stoneworking methods get more complex in more recent time periods, it gets easier to, detect mistakes. So, I don't know, maybe some element of performance in it. It also may just be that the stone tool making techniques are more complicated, and even more complicated, there's more room for error.
Yeah, absolutely.
I tell you, the stone tools we found with the guy from Homo Kibish, the oldest Homo sapiens fossils, they were making. Richard Leakey found the fossils back in the 1960s. We went back in the 2000s and found the archaeology along with the fossils. They were making stone tools that were the size of like a quarter. And I looked at these things and I thought, holy cow, these guys were good at making stone tools. It's easy to make big stone tools, basically, one big boulder, another big boulder, this kind of thing. These guys are making stone tools, about the size of a marble in very precise kind of ways. I thought, my colleagues would say, well, these are archaic humans, these are primitive humans, they're not quite like us, this kind of stuff. And I thought, yeah, right. Make one of these tools. I dare you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Early humans, we underestimate them. This is a great video, you guys. It's Geico Caveman History Channel docent. It's got those Geico Caveman. One of his characters is for History Channel. He's a museum docent, and he describes about these Cro-Magnons, or Ice Age humans, and they invented clothing and agriculture and all the rest of this stuff. It's like that is what these guys would be like if you could bring them back today. They were smart.
Yeah. But it seems like you'd have to be. I mean, if it's there's no participation trophy. You either make it or you don't, and we're the result of millions and millions of generations of the guy who made it.
Yeah.
And it feels cheapening to try to make it. Wow, they were something. No, they were making it, and it was insane back then.
Well, evolution does have a participation trophy. It's extinction.
Yes.
Okay. They'll prize for second best.
Right.
So we're so different from these circumstances in which our ancestors evolved, and the challenges they faced and the survival difficulties they overcame. We forget about them. I also got 40 some odd years ago when I was an undergraduate student, I remember asking old Professor Gable, I said, how do you make fire? And it was like, well, somehow, silence, or they didn't answer the question. Silence and somehow aren't answers.
Yeah.
We can answer this question. Look, if we can understand, how muons and gluons and cleons or whatever the hell, some atomic particles relate to each other, we can figure out how people made fire 500,000 years ago. We just have to, cowboy the hell up and ask the question and recognize, it's not easy. It's going to be difficult, but who becomes an anthropologist to answer easy questions?
Yeah, and it's an important question.
It's also it's fascinating because there's something that happens when you try it and it works. Like because I have on my YouTube channel now. Granted, I was using somewhat more modern stuff, but it was the catch a spark on a piece of charred material, blow it into flame, and it is still one of the first time I did it is still like one of the most vivid memories of. It's hard to explain. It felt very primal, very like powerful, and in a way that a lot of other things don't. And I just it's hard to describe to someone who's never done it.
Back I did Cody London's Desert Drifter course from the Aboriginal Living Skills School of Prescott, Arizona, and it was a mixed group. Like I said, there's one guy who was an ex-Marine, a kid who his parents ran a gold mine, a bunch of people were CEOs of software companies, and it was just accomplishing basic stuff. Like when we all sat around and made friction fire by bow drill and this kind of stuff. It was for some of them. It was like, I mean, I'd done this stuff before. It was fun. It was cool, and but some of these guys, it was just like it rocked their world. They were not the same person that afternoon as they were that morning. And, getting in touch with those ancestral skills it's really important thing. I wish there was more opportunities for people to do this.
There's definitely something to that. The first time Bill took me hunting, got a deer. We processed it. I decided I was going to I took it all home myself. I did the whole thing, and I cooked it, and then I ate it. And then there's that moment when you eat it and you go, oh, I get it now. Like, okay, I understand there's a thing to this, and there's something behind being like, I did this, and you're like, okay, I understand now. Like, it's a different thing.
There's another part that just drives me nuts whenever I'm talking to somebody who's never done anything outdoors except look at it, where they're like, well, you just go out and kill a deer. I'm like, that's not easy. Even if I give you a rifle and a scope and bullets, it's still not easy. There are skills involved. And they're like, what are you talking about? You just go shoot the deer. I'm like, this is...
It's not a video game.
And honestly, white-tailed deer in Texas are kind of dumb, and they're all over the place. And it's still not easy to do.
Yeah. And also, there's also the emotional component. You're taking a life.
Well, it's more the assumption that, it's not going to be that hard. And it's just like, even getting into there's... I grew up with hunting. It's just a part of the natural order of life for me. And but there are things again that are very primal in it, and I don't know. It's just people think it was easy. They look back on it, and they're like, it was, hunting's easy, fishing's easy. No, it's not. Try and do it.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. People think these things are easy because we all have a lot of technology between us and them. I don't hunt. And it's not that I can't. I'm a very good marksman. NRA certified or something like this. I got some award for marksmanship. I don't hunt because I don't need to, and I don't hunt because I don't think killing things for recreation is not me. Other people feel differently. That's fine. That's them. I'm me. But understanding the connection between what you do and its consequences is important. I teach my students, and honest to God, I think steak comes from trees.
Yes.
Or today, I was saying, literally today, is that if you're in trouble and you have the signal, what would you do? Cell phone. So what if the cell phone service is out? I don't know what to do. And it's like, well, okay, today we're going to learn about rescue whistles and signaling to aircraft using a mirror. So it's like a magic trick at the end of the class. But I wish my colleagues and other paleoanthropologists would ask these kinds of questions. How do people solve these problems? How do they overcome them? Because again, it's not that we can't answer the questions. It's that we don't ask the questions and insist that there be answers.
Yeah.
If we say, okay, why do people domesticate cows or dogs or pigs or whatever? There's all kinds of, literally thousands of papers about that. Why do people build cities? Thousands of papers about that. Why do people begin global trade wars? Again, thousands of papers about that. How do people make fire? Silence. Without fire, we're just another monkey.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hoping that I'm noticing a newer trend in the experimental archaeology. It feels like I'm seeing more and more, not necessarily academics, some of them are, people asking these kind of questions. And I remember I watched the show very recently where someone was like, Stonehenge, we think we know when it was built. We think we know what the boat was like at the time. Can we build one as close to how they did it then? And it may have been Nova or somebody like that who put the show on. But it was, can we take it and get it there? And it was just fascinating to watch them trying to figure out how could they have lifted the stone? How would they have done this? And it feels like there's more, at least at the amateur level, experimental archaeology going on. And I'm catching a lot of it on YouTube. People like Daniel and I who are like, how do we do this? I don't know. Let's go out and try and do it and see what happened. It may not have been the exact way, but it's a way, right?
Yeah. Experimental archaeology has gone through some changes. Early on, it was just unstructured. Somebody would say, I can bang two rocks together. I'll go out in my backyard and butcher a deer. This is how people butcher deer. That kind of stuff. It's gotten more sophisticated, and it's due to younger scholars, guys who were in their 20s and 30s, who've really embraced the scientific method and said, if I can't prove this wrong, it's not science. And so things like reconstructing the Stonehenge triathons, building a replica of a pyramid, they're fine. They're entertainment. And they're inspiration for hypotheses. But the bottom line is if it's science, you have to be able to prove it wrong. I love this stuff. I have colleagues who do these kinds of things. I call them my sons. My former students and younger colleagues who I've been and daughters who've been influenced. But the bottom line is, can you prove it wrong?
Yeah.
I mean, the one I love, is the statues in Rapa Nui on Easter Island. The Europeans came and said, how do these statues get there? They walked. And then, what experimental archaeologists showed is that if you tied ropes around them and pulled in different directions, they move back and forth like they're walking. It's like, okay, but can you prove it wrong? I mean,
yeah, do it. Let's see it happen.
Well, with experimental archaeology too, I deal with earlier time ranges. My colleagues are like, well, humans just chased carnivores away from large mammal death sites and scavenged the remains. It's like, okay, that's nice.
Yeah,
have you ever been to Eastern Africa around the death site of Cape Buffalo and tried to get near it? Okay, first you have to get through the vultures, and then you have to get through the lions. After that, there's the hyenas. And when the hyenas are done, there's the jackals and other things. So do please show me how these early humans, specialized on exploiting large animal death sites. They probably did. These guys are smart and they're tough. But, just this assumption of that, well, they solved it somehow, or, the answer to your question is silence. That's not science.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was spectacularly interesting.
Gentlemen,
your book is great. The Unstoppable Human Species. The footnotes are hilarious. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. Okay. I was reading through just going, that's funny,
My editor Beatrice is like,
Do you have a publication date yet? Do you know when it's going to be out?
It's been out since March.
Oh, it's been out since March. Oh, okay.
Excellent.
Perfect.
The next one will be Surviving Prehistory, in which I take all the stuff I've been learning in survival archaeology, survival classes, and try to answer questions about how people solve different difficulties.